The man and the dog stood before the ruin as the sky bruised purple over the mountains. To anyone else, the collapsed farmhouse and its skeletal, rust-eaten shed were a scar on the landscape, worthless land, haunted by failure. But the German shepherd, Kaiser, knew better. His body was tense, his gaze fixed on the shed's warped door, as if he could see through the decaying timber to the 100-year-old secret of betrayal and redemption locked inside. A secret that would force the broken veteran beside him to either heal his deepest wound or be destroyed by it. We love bringing you stories of hope and the unbreakable bond between people and their loyal companions. Please support us by subscribing to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. We read every single one. John Callahan felt the familiar chill that had nothing to do with the coming storm. It was a cold that lived in his bones, a permanent resident since the day he'd watched his best friend Leo fall in a haze of dust and sun in a country he no longer named. He had inherited this scrap of land from a great uncle he'd never met, a final, inconvenient piece of a life he wanted nothing to do with. His plan was simple: ignore it. Let the county seize it for back taxes. Let it rot, just as he was. He turned to go back to his truck, back to the silent apartment where the ghosts were waiting. But Kaiser didn't move. The dog, a stoic shadow John had rescued a year ago, planted his feet and let out a low, insistent whine. He nudged John's hand with his wet nose, then looked pointedly at the shed. John sighed, the sound swallowed by the wind. "There's nothing there, boy. Just rust." Kaiser whined again, a higher, more urgent pitch this time. He took a few steps toward the shed, looked back, and barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that cut through John's apathy. It was the same bark the dog used when he'd knocked a bottle from John's hand 2 nights before, standing over him until the fog of grief and whiskey had cleared just enough. John looked from the dog to the shed, then back. The first fat drops of rain began to fall. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. Something other than the hollow ache of memory. He worked for hours, losing himself in the rhythm of destruction and clearing. Kaiser never left his side, occasionally nudging his hand as if to say, "Keep going." As the storm reached its peak and the shed was nearly cleared, Kaiser began to act strangely. He paced to a corner of the earthen floor, sniffing intently at a section of old, mismatched floorboards. He pawed at one of the boards, then looked at John, his tail giving a single emphatic thump. John knelt, running his hand over the wood. It felt no different from the rest. "It's just the floor, buddy." Kaiser let out a low growl and pawed again, more forcefully this time, his claws scratching the grimy surface. A flicker of curiosity broke through John's exhaustion. He wedged the pry bar under the board. It resisted, then gave way with a splintering crack. Beneath it, nestled in the dark packed earth, was a small tin box, green with age and sealed with a heavy, intricate lock. John carried the box back to his truck, the storm finally beginning to recede. The weight of it felt significant, solid. Back in his sterile apartment, he set it on the table. The lock was complex, far beyond a simple latch. It was the kind of puzzle that required patience and precision. In another life, a life before the dust and the sun, he had been good at this. His hands, which now only felt clumsy or destructive, had once been trained for delicate work, disarming complex electronics, picking locks in silent, hostile places. He found a small toolkit he hadn't opened in years. The feel of the steel tension wrench in his hand was an echo from a ghost life. He worked slowly, meticulously, feeling the faint clicks of the tumblers. It was a language he hadn't forgotten. The quiet focus pushed the memories back, holding them at bay. Finally, with a soft snick, the lock gave way. He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a leather-bound journal and a single, ornate brass key. He opened the journal. The script was elegant. The ink faded to a soft brown. It was the diary of a man named Elias Vance, his of obligation, but with a flicker of purpose. He wasn't just clearing a shed anymore. He was on a mission. He began the real work of restoration. He patched the tin roof, the rhythmic hammering a steady, grounding beat. He reinforced the walls, replacing rotted timbers with fresh, strong pine that smelled of resin and life. The physical work reshaped him as much as it reshaped the building. The calluses on his hands were real, earned. The soreness in his muscles was a clean pain, a welcome replacement for the dull ache in his soul. Each nail he drove was an act of defiance against the decay that had threatened to consume him. Kaiser was a constant shadow, a silent supervisor who seemed to approve of the transformation. John found Elias's old workbench, a massive slab of oak, scarred with the marks of 100 projects. Following a cryptic passage in the journal that spoke of listening to the heart of the oak, he found a small, almost invisible keyhole on the side of one of the thick legs. The brass key slid in perfectly. A hidden drawer popped open, revealing another, smaller journal and a set of schematics. This journal spoke of Elias's son, a young soldier killed in a training accident decades ago. The pain in the writing was raw, a father's endless grief. As he worked, John started needing supplies. He drove into the small nearby town, a place he'd only passed through before. At the local hardware store, the owner, a kind-faced man named George, struck up a conversation. "Heard someone was finally fixing up the old Vance place," George said, ringing up John's lumber. "That shed was built to last. Elias Vance was a true artist." For the first time in years, John didn't deflect. He talked about the project, about the solid construction of the old building. It was a simple, human exchange, but for John, it felt monumental. He was reconnecting, one small conversation, one restored board at a time. The shed was no longer a ruin. It was becoming a sanctuary. And for the first time since Leo's death, John felt a glimmer of something he had long thought buried: hope. A week later, a gleaming black sedan crunched up the gravel drive, looking casual dismissal of the work John had poured into the place, the dismissal of the history he was uncovering. He saw the future in Thorne's eyes: bulldozers, concrete, the complete erasure of Elias Vance's legacy. "It's not for sale," John said flatly. Thorne's smile tightened at the edges. "Mr. Callahan, let's be realistic. It's a dilapidated farmhouse and a shed. I'm offering you a fresh start, cash in your pocket." "I said it's not for sale." The words felt solid, rooted. He was defending more than just land. He was defending his own fragile recovery. Kaiser moved to stand beside John, his posture rigid, his eyes locked on Thorne. The developer's gaze flickered to the dog, a brief flash of annoyance crossing his features. "Think it over," Thorne said, his voice losing its artificial charm. He pulled a business card from his jacket and held it out. "Everyone has a price. You'll figure yours out eventually." John didn't take the card. Thorne let it drop to the dirt, then turned and got back into his car, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the car disappeared, Kaiser nudged John's hand, his low growl finally subsiding. The dog had known from the moment Thorne arrived. This was not a man who built things, but one who destroyed them. The peace John had found was shattered. A few days later, he arrived at the property to find the new window he'd installed in the shed smashed, glass glittering on the floor of his workshop. There was no note, no message needed. It was a clear escalation from Thorne, a warning. That night, the phone calls started. Blocked number. No one spoke, just the unnerving sound of breathing on the other end of the line before it clicked off. John felt the old training kicking in, the cold, familiar hypervigilance he had tried so hard to suppress. The world was no longer a place of quiet healing. It was a potential threat matrix. Every passing car, every unfamiliar sound, put him on edge. Thorne was trying to intimidate him, to prey on the instability he assumed defined every broken veteran. He wanted John to feel isolated and powerless. The tactic was working. The message was as clear as the broken window. I know who you are. I know where you're broken. I can destroy you. The threat was no longer about property. It was about his life, his past, his very identity. Shaken and furious, John retreated to the one place he felt safe, the workshop. He needed answers. He took out the second, smaller journal he'd found in the workbench. It was filled with Elias's heartbroken investigation into his son's death. The official report called it an accident caused by faulty equipment during a training exercise. But Elias, a meticulous craftsman, didn't believe it. He had documented his correspondence with the military, his pleas for a real investigation, all of which were dismissed. Tucked into the back of the journal was a small oilskin pouch. John's fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside were 2 tarnished dog tags. The name stamped on them was Thomas Vance. Beneath them was a folded, yellowed newspaper clipping. It was a small article announcing a new military supply contract awarded to a burgeoning company for climbing harnesses and safety lines. The company was Thorne Industries, founded by Marcus Thorne's father. John's blood ran cold. He scrambled for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. He searched for archives, for any information on Thorne Industries and military contracts. And then he found it. An obscure report from a military oversight committee, years later, investigating a series of equipment failures. The report mentioned a specific model of carabiner, a load-bearing clip used in climbing and helicopter insertions, that had a manufacturing defect making it prone to failure under stress. The model number was seared into John's memory. It was the same model that had failed on Leo's harness that day. The carabiner that had snapped, sending his best friend, his brother, falling to his death. The cover-up wasn't just about Thomas Vance. It was a generational rot. The Thorne family had built their fortune on defective equipment, cutting corners, and burying the truth with their money and influence. Marcus Thorne wasn't just trying to steal his land. His family was responsible for the wound John had carried, not to explosives, but to floodlights salvaged from the old barn, and high-powered strobes that would blind and confuse anyone crossing them. He used his knowledge of electronics to set up a perimeter of motion sensors that fed to a simple, silent alarm on his phone. The shed, his sanctuary, became his command center. He boarded up the broken window, reinforcing the door with a steel bar he bought from George at the hardware store. He positioned his tools, his heavy woodworking equipment, not as implements of creation, but as obstacles. He knew Thorne would not come alone. He anticipated their path of approach, the way they would use the darkness for cover. He thought about their mindset, arrogant, expecting a broken man, unprepared for a professional. He moved with a quiet, deadly efficiency that felt like breathing. There was no anger, no rage, just a cold, clear focus. This was a mission. Kaiser watched his every move, a silent partner in the preparations. The dog seemed to understand the shift in the air, the tension coiling around the property. He no longer dozed in the sun, but patrolled the perimeter with John, his ears twitching at every sound, his presence a steady, reassuring weight. As the sun set on the second day, John sat on the steps of the shed, cleaning an old hunting rifle he hadn't touched in years. He checked the action, the smooth mechanical click, a familiar sound in the twilight. He wasn't planning to use it, but its presence was a final line. He was ready. He would not be a victim in his own story. They came after midnight, just as he knew they would. A dark SUV with its lights off rolled to a stop at the end of the gravel drive. 3 figures emerged, moving with the clumsy confidence of hired muscle. John watched them on the small monitor connected to a night vision camera he'd positioned in a tree. He saw Thorne hang back, directing his 2 thugs forward. They were carrying crowbars. They clearly expected a simple act of violent persuasion. John took a deep breath, his heart a steady, slow drum. He let them get halfway to the shed before he pressed the first button on his seconds. Thorne, watching from the shadows, was stunned. This wasn't the broken man from the file. Enraged, he pulled a pistol from his jacket and stormed toward the shed himself. "Callahan," he roared, "you think this changes anything?" John stood in the doorway of the workshop, unarmed. "It's over, Thorne. It's been over for a long time." Thorne raised the pistol, his face a mask of fury. "You have something that belongs to me. That land, those journals. You're going to sign it all over." At that moment, Kaiser, who had been lying silently in the darkest corner of the workshop, launched himself forward. He was not a barking, snarling beast, but a silent, 100-pound projectile of focused muscle and loyalty. He hit Thorne's chest with incredible force, knocking him off his feet. The gun flew from his hand, skittering across the wooden floor. Before Thorne could react, Kaiser had his arm pinned to the ground, his teeth bared inches from the man's face, a deep, rumbling growl promising deadly consequences for any sudden movement. The dog didn't bite. He didn't need to. He simply held the man, a perfect, unwavering instrument of justice, until the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, alerted by the silent alarm John had triggered. The arrival of the police turned the chaotic confrontation into a quiet, methodical resolution. Thorne and his hired thugs were taken into custody, their crowbars and the discarded pistol speaking volumes. But the real victory came from the tin box. The journals of Elias Vance, combined with John's own research and the testimony of the illegal assault, were enough to trigger a full-blown investigation into Thorne development and the decades of corruption that propped it up. The story of the decorated veteran defending his small patch of land against a powerful corporation became a local sensation, but John wanted none of it. He had found his justice not in the headlines, but in the quiet peace that settled over the property. In the second journal, Elias had left one final clue, a reference to his heartwood legacy. Following the instructions, John found a false back in the massive oak workbench. Behind it lay Elias's masterpiece, a collection of exquisitely had found his purpose not in forgetting the past, but in honoring it, in building a future from its broken pieces. He and Kaiser had found their home. True loyalty is a quiet force, a steady presence in the darkest of storms that asks for nothing but gives everything. It can be the anchor that stops a soul from drifting into despair, and the silent courage that stands beside you when you finally choose to fight. John's journey shows us that healing isn't about erasing our scars, but about finding the strength to build a new life around them, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are not things we find, but the peace we build with our own 2 hands. We are so grateful you joined us for this story. What did you think of Kaiser's incredible loyalty? Let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps our community grow, so please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs a story of hope, and subscribing for more content like this. We would be honored to read your story next.